Have you ever returned to a place and felt like nothing was the same? As if the streets were the same, the buildings were still there, but everything around you held a different weight. Even the air seemed to carry memories you wanted to forget. That's exactly how I felt when I stepped foot back in my hometown. After months away, after days when the war seemed endless, I was back. But what no one told me is that returning home can be as difficult as leaving. The city seemed to stare back at me. Every corner whispered stories only I knew, and every passing face seemed to ask, "What happened to you?" Maybe you felt this too, that feeling of being a stranger in the place that should be the most familiar. I carried the invisible scars of everything I'd experienced. They weren't wounds visible to the eye, but they were there in every thought that insisted on returning in the middle of the night, in every sound that made me relive what I wanted to forget. That's why I say that war doesn't end when silence falls on the battlefield. It continues within us in a place no one else can enter. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt like you were back but that a part of you was still there? Lost somewhere in the past? Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. Amidst this whirlwind of memories, I found myself walking the streets as if trying to find myself again. The familiar ground beneath my feet felt strange. People stared, some waved, others looked away, and it was there, in the midst of all this, that something unexpected happened. I was sitting on a park bench trying to gather my thoughts when I saw a man approaching. He wasn't someone I recognized, at least not at first glance. He stopped in front of me and, without hesitation, said my name. In that instant, a shiver ran through me. How did he know who I was? This encounter felt heavy with a weight I couldn't explain. It was as if this stranger knew more about me than I was willing to reveal. He didn't ask how I was. He just looked into my eyes and was silent for a few seconds. That silence spoke louder than any words. Perhaps you've experienced something like this. A moment when someone seems to see beyond your facade, beyond your automatic smile, and sees what you're trying to hide. That moment became the turning point when everything began to change. And that's why I want to take you with me on this story. Because what happened next wasn't just a conversation, it was an invitation to something much greater. If you've ever felt like you needed a sign, a word, or an encounter to give meaning to what you were experiencing, you'll understand every step of this journey. And it was there on that park bench that something began to change inside me. It wasn't the end of the pain, but perhaps it was the beginning of something new. And that's where our story truly begins. And you know what's most incredible? As I relived it all on that park bench, I realized this story isn't just mine. Perhaps you, watching, also carry your own silent battles, your own scars that no one sees. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far, or if you've been through something similar. I read each comment carefully, because that's where we transform this video into a true conversation, a space where others can feel welcomed and realize they're not alone. And if this message spoke to you in any way, if it brought up something important, like this video right now, each like is like turning on a little light so more people can find this story and discover that there's still hope after pain. This is how YouTube understands that this content needs to reach those who might be looking for a word of encouragement right now. And if you want to continue walking with me through these inspiring stories that touch the depths of our souls and remind us that it's still possible to start over, subscribe to the channel right now. This is what gives me the strength to continue bringing new stories and creating this space for reflection for you. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. As I looked at this man who knew my name, something in me began to stir, as if this encounter was just the beginning of something much bigger. When I set foot back in my city, it was as if time had paused just to observe me. The streets were the same broken sidewalks, the same sound of hurried footsteps, the distant rumble of passing cars, the smell of fresh coffee wafting from the corner diner I'd frequented before going to war. Everything seemed the same, but I wasn't the same anymore. That feeling of relief at being alive mixed with a strange anxiety that tightened my chest. It was as if the city recognized me and at the same time looked at me like a stranger. At every corner, memories came back like flashes. Friends who stayed, moments I wanted to relive, and others I wanted to erase forever. The air seemed thicker, charged with stories only I could hear. I felt the impact of every detail, as if I were seeing it all for the first time. The bakery where I bought bread before work, the school where we played basketball in the afternoons, the field where my father taught me to play soccer. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different. Maybe it was I who had changed. Coming home is a shock no one prepares us for. After seeing so much out there, carrying the weight of decisions that shaped my life, living in a state of alert for so long, it's difficult to simply shut off my mind and act as if nothing had happened. There was a strange feeling of being simultaneously safe and vulnerable. People smiled when they saw me. Some came to hug me, others just waved from afar. And behind every glance I felt unspoken questions. Is he okay? Is he still the same? And I wondered the same thing. Was I still that young man who had left months ago, full of plans and dreams? Or had a part of me remained forever on the battlefield? In the United States, the return of veterans to their hometowns is a moment filled with symbols. Flags on porches, neighbors coming to greet them, a sense of pride that blends patriotism and grief. But what no one sees are the battles that continue to rage in the minds of those who have returned. The war doesn't end when the plane lands or when the uniform is put away in the closet. It continues in dreams interrupted by the dawn, in memories that arise without warning, in the silence that screams when the house is empty. I walked the streets, and every sound seemed amplified. The ringing of a church bell, a child's laughter, even the rustling of trees brought me back to a moment I'd lived. Sometimes, just the sound of a louder engine was enough to make my heart race, as if I still needed to protect myself. It's strange trying to explain this to someone who's never been through something like this. It's like living between two worlds, the one everyone can see, and the one that exists only within you. And that's where the true journey of transformation begins. It's not just about returning home. It's about relearning how to live, about finding meaning again in the simple things, rebuilding the mindset that was shattered, having the courage to face the hidden truths that were hidden behind a facade of strength. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is where the revelations that truly change everything begin. It's when you realize that surviving isn't enough. You have to learn to live again. And every step I took in that city seemed to test me, as if asking, "Are you ready to start over?" I passed the places that once brought me joy, and felt a mix of nostalgia and fear. But at the same time, there was something calling me to move forward, to not be stuck in what had passed. This process is full of ups and downs, days when you feel like you're moving forward, and others when it feels like everything is back to square one. But it's in this fluctuation that healing begins to form, little by little, almost without you realizing it. As I stopped in front of the main square, I looked around and felt a strange peace mixed with unease. It was as if something was about to happen, as if this place held an answer I hadn't yet realized I needed. Life has these things. It puts us exactly where we need to be, even when we don't understand why. It was there that I felt this story was just beginning, that every scar had something to teach me, and that I wasn't alone, even on the days when loneliness seemed to scream. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to start over." I want to know if this part of the story also spoke to you, and if you feel that this journey is, in some way, yours too. There are wounds that time doesn't reveal. They don't bleed. They don't leave marks on the skin, but they throb in the mind in a way that only those who bear them can understand. My invisible scars began to manifest as soon as the noise of war gave way to the silence of my city's streets. It was in this silence that the ghosts came, memories of endless nights in the desert, the sound of helicopters cutting through the sky, the sudden crack of gunfire that still echoed in my head even when everything was calm. It was as if my body was still on alert, even though I was miles from any threat. In the United States, we talk a lot about supporting our veterans, but few people truly understand what happens after they return home. It's not just about what happened abroad. It's about how it shapes every thought, every decision from now on. I've often found myself waking up in the middle of the night, sweaty, heart racing, ready to act as if I were still on the battlefield. The worst part is that no one around you knows what's going on inside you. You smile at breakfast, try to talk normally, but inside, you're reliving it all over again. Guilt was a constant shadow, not just for the things I saw, but for the choices I had to make. In war, you quickly learn that every decision has a price, and some of them are forever etched in your conscience. I wondered if I could have done things differently, if I could have saved someone who didn't return, if I was worthy of sitting there breathing while others didn't have the same chance. This is the hidden truth about return. It's not just a celebration, it's also a confrontation with one's own soul. Days passed, and even in the middle of the city I felt isolated. It wasn't because people didn't care, it was because no one seemed to be able to access that place inside me. I walked the streets and suddenly memories came flooding back like movies playing in my mind. Sometimes the smell of smoke from a steakhouse transported me back to a night when the air was thick with gunpowder. Other times, the sound of fireworks on the 4th of July made me instinctively dive to the ground, before remembering I was safe. This is the impact no one sees, the weight we carry in silence. And yet, amidst this confusion, there was a small flame that refused to go out. A part of me that wanted to find meaning, that wanted to believe that all of this had some greater purpose. It was at this point that I began to realize I couldn't face this journey alone. I needed to look within, understand the underbelly of my own emotions, face the fears I'd been trying to bury. This was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, to stop running from myself and start rebuilding myself. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it's in this deep dive that the most important revelations occur. It's when we begin to understand that invisible scars aren't just marks of pain, but also reminders of what we've survived. Every difficult memory, every sleepless night, every unseen tear, all of this is part of the transformation that begins from the inside out. This is the real battle, not fighting the past, but learning to walk alongside it. And it was at that point that something began to change in me. Not all at once, not perfectly, but gradually. Small, daily victories like getting a full night's sleep or simply walking around town without my heart racing. And the more I allowed myself to feel, the more I realized I wasn't alone. There are thousands of men and women who carry the same invisible scars, each on their own healing journey. And somehow knowing I wasn't alone brought me a measure of peace. Write in the comments, I feel this weight. I want to know if this part of the story touched you and if, in some way, you too have carried something that no one could see. I was sitting on a bench in the square, trying to make sense of the city's hustle and bustle, when I saw a man slowly approaching. This was one of the places I used to go to reflect, before everything changed, and being there was already heavy enough. But what happened next was something I couldn't have predicted. He stopped right in front of me, stared at me for a few seconds, and said my name. He didn't ask who I was, he didn't hesitate, he just spoke as if he'd known me for a long time. In that instant, my entire body reacted. I felt my breath catch, my palms sweat, and my heart race. It was as if the world had stopped just for that moment. I watched him closely, trying to remember if I'd seen him before, but nothing about his face seemed familiar. He wasn't in uniform. He didn't look like someone connected to the military, and yet he seemed to carry something about him that was both strange and familiar. His expression was calm, almost serene, but his eyes seemed to see more than I was willing to show. It was a strange sensation, as if this man could read everything that was going on inside me without me saying a single word. The square was bustling that late afternoon, families strolling, children playing, the distant sound of someone playing the guitar. But there, in that exact spot, it felt like only the two of us existed. He sat down next to me without asking permission, and a heavy silence fell over the space. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but the kind that seems to carry a deeper meaning. The feeling was that some hidden truth was about to be revealed, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. In the United States, encounters like this are often portrayed in books and films as the turning point of a journey, that moment when the protagonist meets someone who changes the course of the story. But experiencing it in real life has a different impact. You don't know whether to trust, to open up, or to simply get up and walk away. I stood there, motionless, trying to understand if this man was a messenger from my past, or someone sent to show me a new path. The stranger finally broke the silence, saying something that seemed simple but hit me like a punch. You carry too much weight on your shoulders. My first reaction was to laugh nervously, because it was true. How did he know? He hadn't seen the sleepless nights, the anxiety attacks, the memories that haunted me. But somehow he seemed to know all of this. It was as if he had access to the backstage of my mind, as if he saw the turmoil I tried to hide from everyone else. And at that moment, something inside me began to stir. It was as if I were standing before a mirror that showed not my appearance, but my soul. I felt I needed to hear what he had to say, that perhaps this encounter was the beginning of a transformation I hadn't had the courage to seek alone. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this kind of encounter can be the trigger for decisions that change the course of an entire life, for revelations that make us question everything we believed until then, and for a journey that can lead us to a place of healing and reconciliation that seemed impossible. As he continued speaking, I felt my body slowly relax, as if I could finally let my guard down. It was a strange sensation, after so long living on high alert. And it was there, sitting on that park bench, that I began to realize that perhaps I was exactly where I needed to be. Write in the comments. This encounter made me think. I want to know if you've also experienced something that felt like a sign in the midst of chaos. He took a deep breath before speaking, as if choosing each word carefully, and when his voice finally broke the silence, it felt like he was describing my own mind. He didn't ask about the war, didn't ask for details, didn't want to know what it was like there. Instead, he began speaking simply, almost calmly, saying that sometimes we return home with our bodies intact, but our souls shattered into pieces, and that if we don't look at those pieces carefully, they continue to cut us open every day. I was speechless. It was as if he were observing me from within, as if he knew the chaos that surrounded me. As he spoke, a lump formed in my throat. It wasn't just about me. He was describing an experience that thousands of veterans in the United States know well, but rarely have the courage to voice. He spoke about the difficulty of looking in the mirror and recognizing ourselves, about how we learn to hide behind a veneer of strength because we think admitting weakness is failing those left behind. And each word seemed to pierce my defenses, shattering the wall I'd built to protect myself from myself. The conversation deepened, and I could feel my body beginning to relax, as if finally allowed to feel. He told me he'd seen many men carrying the same weight, and that most of them tried to bury the pain until it became too heavy to bear. He said what I was experiencing wasn't a sign of weakness but of humanity. That phrase echoed in my head, humanity. I'd forgotten what it felt like to feel truly human, without fear, without needing to be ready to react at any second. As he spoke, the square seemed to disappear. I could no longer hear the sounds around me, no longer see the movement of people. It was as if we were in a place apart, just me, him, and those words that were beginning to find their way inside me. And for the first time since I'd returned, I felt the urge to talk. I told him about the sleepless nights, about the memories that came without warning, about the people I'd lost who kept visiting me in my dreams. I didn't need to go into detail. He understood every pause, every hesitation, as if he'd been in that same place of pain before. He looked me in the eyes and told me that what I was doing at that moment, speaking, even with difficulty, was the first step toward breaking out of the prison I had created. It wasn't a prison of bars, but of silence. And that silence, he said, is what hurts the most. I felt the tears well up and didn't try to hold them back. It was strange to cry there in the middle of a public space, but at the same time liberating. Each tear seemed to lift a little of the weight I carried in my chest. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this is where true transformation begins. It's when we understand that opening our hearts isn't a sign of weakness, but of courage. When we realize that the decisions we make from this place of vulnerability are the ones that have the greatest impact on our lives. And it was there, on that park bench, that I felt something changing. Not miraculously or instantly, but like a small flame beginning to ignite in the darkness. And in that moment, something curious happened. Instead of feeling embarrassed for opening up, I felt a strange peace, as if I was doing something I should have done long ago. He simply remained silent, allowing me to speak until I had nothing more to say. And when silence filled the space between us again, I realized I felt lighter. Write in the comments. Talking has eased my chest. I want to know if you've ever felt this freedom of letting out something you've kept bottled up for too long. I was silent for a few seconds after he stopped speaking, as if waiting for me to take a deep breath before diving deeper into everything I'd been trying to avoid. And that's exactly what happened. The words began to come out slowly, as if they'd been trapped for months, waiting for the right moment to escape. I told him about the first time I heard the sound of real gunfire, how the ground shook beneath my feet, the fear I felt and had to hide so no one would notice. I told him about the nights I lay awake, praying for the sun to come soon, and that no one in my platoon would be hurt before then. I told him about the friends I'd lost along the way, about those who'd returned, but were never the same again. As I spoke, I felt my body tremble, as if each memory had a life of its own. It wasn't easy to put into words everything that had happened. Talking about the war is like opening a box you've kept locked away in the back of your mind, afraid of what might come out. But in that moment, instead of feeling judged, I felt heard, and that made all the difference. It's curious how sometimes what we need isn't someone to give us answers, but someone who can bear to be there, present, while we're falling apart inside. I talked about the difficult decisions I had to make, about those split seconds when you have to choose between advancing or retreating, and how those choices are etched like invisible tattoos on your conscience. I told of a night when I had to take command because my superior was wounded, and how every order I gave that day came back to haunt me in the months that followed. This is the hidden truth no one sees in the parades or Veterans Day parades, that for every flag raised, there's a memory that still lingers. Tears began to fall without me having time to hold them back. I felt like each word I said lifted a weight from my chest, but at the same time it brought back the impact of everything I'd experienced. It was as if I were watching a movie in slow motion, reliving the moments I most wanted to forget, and it was in that moment that I realized that maybe I was finally beginning to transform all of this into something different, something that could help me move forward. He never interrupted me. He simply listened, his gaze blending compassion and firmness. At one point, he placed his hand on my shoulder and said that what I was doing there, confessing, speaking out loud, was a way to begin healing the wounds that no one else sees. That phrase echoed within me, to begin healing. That's what I wanted, but I didn't know how. It was as if, until that moment, I'd been spinning in circles, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this kind of confession isn't just about exposing pain, but about changing your mindset. It's about taking what happened and giving it new meaning, about understanding that the past doesn't have to define the future. This journey is full of revelations that we can only experience when we stop running from ourselves. Speaking there, on that park bench, was like unlocking a door that had been closed for too long. When I finished speaking, I felt a different kind of tiredness, almost as if I'd run a marathon. But along with that tiredness came a sense of relief. It was as if I'd freed up space within myself for something new to enter. People continued passing through the square, going about their lives, and I stood there, feeling like I'd taken the first step toward truly living again. It was strange to realize that, amidst so much pain, there was a spark of hope. Write in the comments. I took my first step. I want to know if you've also felt that mix of pain and relief when you finally get something out that's been bottled up for too long. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to process everything I'd just said. It was as if my body knew something important was about to happen, and my heart began to beat faster, almost like on the battlefield, when you know you need to pay attention to every detail. The man took a deep breath, lowered his head slightly, and then looked me in the eye with a way that seemed to pierce my skin. He said with a calmness that completely disarmed me that he wasn't there by chance, and that what he had to tell me could completely change the way I saw my own story. In that moment, everything around me lost its sound. The hubbub of the square, the voices of children playing, even the wind seemed to cease. It was as if the universe had created a space just for that conversation to take place. He began speaking slowly, as if knowing each word needs to be absorbed carefully. He said he knew someone from my battalion, someone who had fought alongside me and who carried the same weight of difficult decisions and memories that kept us awake. When he said the name, my entire body reacted. It was as if I'd been punched in the gut. My eyes filled with tears immediately, and a mixture of pain and longing coursed through me. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in months. It was the name of a friend, a brother in arms, someone who never returned. The man continued, telling me that before my friend's last mission they had met by chance in a small town, and during that encounter, my friend had given him a letter he said should be given to me if anything happened. When he took the envelope from his pocket, crumpled and slightly faded with age, my hands trembled. I picked it up as if it were a sacred object. I didn't have the courage to open it right away. I just stared at that handwriting I knew so well, remembering the jokes he told to ease the tension before each patrol, remembering how he was always the first to jump to his feet when someone needed help. When I finally summoned the courage to open it, I felt as if I were unlocking a part of myself that had been dormant. The words were simple, but carried a weight I hadn't known I was still capable of feeling. He spoke of moving forward, of not letting guilt overwhelm the life I still had to live. He said that if I was reading those lines, it was because the worst had happened, and that I needed to promise myself I wouldn't let the darkness win. I couldn't hold back the tears. Every sentence felt like it had been written knowing exactly what I would face months later. As I read, I realized those words were an invitation to transformation, not just comfort. He spoke of mindset, of daily choices that define the course of a life, and of how each of us has the power to decide whether the past will imprison us or propel us toward something greater. It was as if the letter held not only memories but also a key to unlock the part of me that had been frozen since the day it all happened. When I finished reading, I was silent for a long time. The man beside me waited patiently without rushing anything, and then he said something that struck me deeply, that he had saved that letter until he felt I was ready to receive it. He explained that he had returned to the city a few times trying to find me, but always gave up because he felt the time wasn't right yet. And that day, on that park bench, he felt it was finally time. That left me speechless. I wondered how many things in life happen this way, as if there were an invisible synchronicity guiding our encounters and charting the path we need to follow. This revelation shook everything inside me. I had spent months carrying the guilt of not being able to say goodbye, and now suddenly I was receiving not only a farewell but also direction. It was as if my friend was speaking to me from the other side, telling me I could move forward without fear. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because this kind of moment is what we call a turning point. It's that instant when something inside us reorganizes, when we decide we no longer want to live just surviving. It's when we understand that we have no control over what happened, but we do have a choice about what we do from here on out. This letter became a milestone, a kind of memorial I could carry with me, not as a burden, but as a reminder that my life still had purpose. The man then slowly stood up, placed his hand on my shoulder, and said that the letter wasn't the end, but just the beginning of something greater. And then he walked away, blending into the crowd in the square until he disappeared. I sat there clutching the envelope to my chest, feeling like this was the first day of a new chapter in my life. It wasn't as if the pain was over, but it was as if I'd found a way to carry it without it crushing me. I looked up at the sky, which was beginning to change color with the sunset, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And not a naive hope, but a hope that arises when you face the truth head-on and decide to carry on, even if it hurts. That letter had opened the door to a new mindset, to new decisions I knew I needed to make. And in that moment, I realized the next step would be to find a way to transform all of this into something meaningful, something that could honor my friend's memory and, at the same time, help me rebuild my own life. Write in the comments, this message arrived at just the right time. I want to know if you too have experienced an encounter or revelation that completely changed the way you saw your story. I stood there on the bench for a long time, even after the man had left, as if my legs wouldn't obey the command to get up. I held that letter as if it were the last thing connecting me to my friend, and in a way it was. The words I'd read still echoed in my head, and each time I repeated them mentally, something inside me seemed to rearrange itself. I'd always thought that moving on would be like erasing the past, like trying to pretend none of it had ever happened. But in that moment I realized that moving on might mean just the opposite, looking at it all head on, accepting that it's part of who I am, and deciding that it's still worth carrying on. The sky was beginning to change color, and the lights in the square came on one by one, casting that yellowish hue that always gave me the feeling of late afternoon in my childhood. For a few minutes I just breathed, feeling the cool air rushing into my lungs. It was as if I were learning to breathe again. The city was there, alive, pulsing, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I might belong there again. Even the sound of passing cars seemed different, less threatening. I felt like this was a turning point. One of those moments that when we look back years later we know changed everything. I got up slowly, like someone waking from a long sleep, and began walking through the streets. Each step felt like a test. The familiar storefronts, the smell of hamburgers coming from a diner, the sound of a dog barking in the distance. Everything brought back memories of before the war, but now with a different weight. It was as if I were being called to decide whether I wanted to continue carrying the past like a prison, or use it as fuel for something new. When I passed the town church, I stopped for a moment. The doors were open, and some people were entering for evening mass. I didn't go in, but stood there at the door, listening to the sound of the choir singing. That melody gave me a strange feeling, almost like a hug. I took a deep breath and kept walking. I arrived home and stood at the door before turning the handle. The familiar scent hit me like a wave of memories. Sunday dinners, conversations on the porch, laughter that seemed so distant now. I walked slowly inside and sat at the kitchen table, still holding the letter. I picked up the phone and with trembling hands wrote a message to my sister. Can we talk tomorrow? I didn't write anything else. That alone was hard enough. It was as if each letter typed was a small brick removed from the wall I had built around myself. That night I decided not to turn on the TV. Instead, I sat on the porch and gazed at the dark, star-studded sky. It had been a while since I'd stopped to simply be there. undistracted. And it was in that silence that I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the naive hope that everything would suddenly be okay, but the hope that arises when you realize there's still a path, even if it's long and full of obstacles. I grabbed an old notebook I'd been keeping and began to write. I didn't write much, just a few words that came to mind. Move on, heal, live. It was the first time I allowed myself to put something I felt on paper. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because this was the point where I understood that the healing process is made up of small, daily decisions. It's not a magical moment that solves everything at once. It's choosing to get out of bed on a bad day. It's choosing to respond to a text from someone who cares. It's making an appointment at the VA to talk to a therapist, even if your pride screams at you not to. In the United States, there are entire programs dedicated to helping veterans reintegrate into civilian life. But many of us avoid seeking this support because we feel like we have to figure it all out on our own. That night, I decided that wasn't going to be the case for me anymore. The next day I woke up early. The sun hadn't risen yet, but I was already up. I made coffee, sipped slowly, and watched the steam rise from the mug. I felt it was time to take a step I'd been putting off for months. I picked up the phone and called the Department of Veterans Affairs. The operator's voice was calm and patient, and within minutes, I had scheduled my first therapy session. I hung up the phone with a mixture of fear and relief. It was as if I'd taken the first step into unfamiliar territory, yet somehow it felt safe. Later, I got in the car and drove aimlessly for a few hours, listening to music. Some songs made me cry, others made me smile. It was as if each note was helping to untie the knots that had been stuck in my chest. I passed places I used to frequent before I went to war and realized they weren't the same anymore. Or maybe I wasn't the same anymore. But that didn't scare me anymore. Instead of trying to reclaim who I was, I began to accept that I was becoming someone new. That afternoon, I sat down to write again. This time, I wrote a letter to myself. I wrote everything I was afraid to say out loud. The guilt, the longing, the regrets, but also the dreams I still had, the places I wanted to visit, the people I wanted to see again. It was a painful but liberating exercise. When I finished, I folded the paper and put it in the same envelope as my friend's letter. It was as if those two letters, side by side, represented my past and my future. That night, I called my sister. The conversation was full of pauses, sometimes silence, but it was honest. She cried, I cried, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like our relationship was starting over. She told me she was proud of me, not because I'd been strong all along, but because I was finally letting people see me for who I really was. That touched me deeply. When I hung up the phone, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. It wasn't a magic solution, but it was a start. I knew there would still be difficult days ahead, that I would still have nightmares, and that the pain wouldn't suddenly disappear. But now I had a starting point, and it changed everything. Write in the comments. I also chose to live. I want to know if you've ever felt that moment when you decide to take the first step to start over, even without knowing what the path will be like. I returned home that night feeling as if the city were breathing along with me. The windows lit, the smell of wet grass wafting from the yards, the distant sound of a baseball game on the neighbor's radio. Everything seemed to say, in a simple way, that life goes on even when we stop. I sat on the porch with the letter on the table and stared at the marks of time on the wood, as if each scratch were a recorded memory. The phrase that kept hammering inside me was a single, clear, almost prayer-like phrase. Sometimes God uses strangers to remind us of who we are, and that there is still life after the pain. I can't explain why those words became a shelter so quickly, but it was as if suddenly my story was no longer locked in a dark room. The letter had turned on a light. The next day, I decided to walk to the city lake before dawn. The sky was still charcoal when the first streak of orange appeared on the horizon, and I felt a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't euphoria, nor exaggerated relief. It was simply stillness. The still water reflected the dawning, and I thought about how many times I'd tried to start over, forcing my mind to forget. Not now. Now I wanted to remember the right way, without punishing myself. I wanted to accept that memory can also be a place of healing when we shift our mindset and decide to see the past as a stern master, not an executioner. Later, I went to the diner where, as a child, my father used to take me on Saturdays for hot chocolate. The metal counter, the bell on the door, the smell of grilled bacon, everything there seemed to tell a piece of my story. The waitress, who recognized me from school, placed a mug of coffee in front of me without asking. She just said, "Good to see you here." And that simple gesture had an impact I hadn't expected. It's funny how, behind the scenes in life, it's the quiet kindnesses that pull you back in. I didn't need long speeches. I needed discreet signs that there was still a place for me in the ordinary world. As I sipped my coffee, two people at the table behind me chatted about the school fair, about fundraising, about parents organizing their kids' soccer tournaments. Small routine things in this giant country that thrives on appointments and calendars on the refrigerator. That conversation gave me a strange urge to participate in something simple, to be part of a routine that didn't involve patrols or reports. That's when I realized that transformation isn't a leap. It's an accumulation of small, invisible, almost domestic decisions. Paying the bills on time, washing the car on a Sunday afternoon, saying, "Okay, I'll go," when a friend invites you to a family barbecue. I returned home with the idea of calling my friend's mother, the same one who wrote the letter. It wasn't an easy call. I was afraid I wouldn't know what to say, afraid of the silence that would ensue, afraid of breaking down mid-conversation. Still, I dialed. When she answered, I didn't try to be strong. I told her I'd received a letter, that I was trying to honor his words, that I missed him every day. On the other end, she cried softly and said she'd considered me part of the family since the first time I took him to Thanksgiving dinner. And she added something I'll never forget, that the hidden truth of moving on isn't forgetting the one who left, but walking forward with love as a provision. The call lasted only a short time, but it left a warm echo. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this moment showed me that healing has its own rhythms and symbols. Sometimes the symbolic step isn't grand. It's just a hug delivered in the right way. I went to see my sister that afternoon. She opened the door before I could knock and hugged me tightly, as if she knew words couldn't reach certain places. I felt the impact of that hug like someone receiving a silent confirmation. You belong here. We spent the afternoon sorting through old boxes, looking at photos I hadn't seen in years. In one of them I was wearing a crooked cap, trying to look brave on the first day of baseball practice. I laughed to myself. There was courage there. I just didn't call it that. That evening, I walked down the street to the church. The parking lot lights illuminated the steeple, and the choir was practicing a hymn I'd known since childhood. I walked in without much thought and sat in the back just to listen. I wasn't looking for theological answers or trying to negotiate with heaven. I just wanted to be near a place that reminded me that life has layers. The pastor, during the break, spoke about new beginnings that seemed too small to notice, but that changed the direction of an entire journey. I remained silent, and that was enough. Sometimes what transforms us isn't speaking, but listening. In the following days, I kept my commitment to the VA session. I said what I could, kept quiet about what still hurt too much, and wrote between appointments. My therapist explained that the brain learns to live on alert and that we can relearn how to slow down. No magic promises, no shortcuts. I appreciated this honesty. It brought a practical revelation. Courage is patient. I left and bought a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote a phrase that wasn't mine, but that now defined me. I will stay. Stay to get through the good days and the bad. Stay to see spring arrive again. Stay for the birthdays, the barbecues, the little league games that fill Saturdays with the beautiful roar of the stands. One afternoon, I passed the field where my father taught me to pitch. A boy was playing alone, his glove faded. I watched from afar until he saw me and awkwardly asked for a tip. I showed him how to position his fingers on the ball, told him a breathing trick, and he nailed it. He smiled like someone who conquers the world. That smile gave me a jolt of meaning. It was as if, for an instant, I saw my mission clearly, to transform pain into usefulness, memory into guidance, longing into service. Not heroic service, but daily service. Life demanded presence from me, not perfection. One Friday night, I accepted a neighbor's invitation to a backyard bonfire. I sat, listened to stories, and didn't need to be the center of anything. The conversation revolved around music, city elections, chili recipes. When someone asked how I was, I answered as truthfully as possible, getting better slowly. No one tried to fix anything. They just nodded, as if they respect the timing of things. And I realized that this respect is a kind of love. As the weeks passed, my rituals became more consistent. Writing 3 lines a day, walking on the lake at dawn, calling my sister on Wednesdays, giving thanks for whatever I could give thanks for. The crises didn't disappear, but they lost their tyranny. When they came, I had someone to talk to, where to anchor, how to breathe. It wasn't a new me. It was the same me, gently restored to me. Little by little, my mindset stopped revolving around what I'd lost and gravitated toward what I could still build. That was the big decision. Choosing the ground of reality and on it, laying the foundations for what's to come. On the last Sunday of the month, I walked to the square. The same bench, the same place. I sat down, took the letter from my pocket, and read it quietly, as if praying. There was no wind, but the trees were moving. I placed my hand on the envelope and said 2 words I had long owed. I stay. I stay to honor, to learn, to care. I stay to see life grow again. When I stood up, I realized the symbolic step had already been taken without me noticing. I was walking with a look of hope. Not the hope of someone who deludes themselves, but of someone who accepts the cracks and still chooses the direction. I left the square with the feeling that something had aligned inside. And as I crossed the street, I felt a calm certainty. There are encounters that change the route, letters that rewrite maps, arms that support the crossing. The rest is to continue. He writes, I choose to remain. This story is about finding light where before there was only shadow, and about realizing that even when everything seems ripped away from you, there is still a path that can be walked. As I walked home that afternoon, I felt like each step I took was a silent declaration. I choose to keep going. The letter in my pocket was more than paper and ink. It was a reminder that I didn't come this far to give up, and this awareness began to change the way I looked at the people around me. The neighbor mowing the lawn, the lady walking the dog, the teenagers laughing loudly on the corner. They had no idea what I was going through, but somehow they were part of my healing. The world kept turning, and I was determined to turn with it. In the days that followed, I began to notice small transformations happening almost effortlessly. Getting a full night's sleep stopped being a miracle and became a gift I gratefully received. The noise of the weekend fireworks still made my body stiffen for a few seconds, but now I took a deep breath and remembered where I was. Memories came. Yes, but they no longer overwhelmed me as before. They came as visitors, not enemies. And I learned to listen to them, to be grateful for what they taught me and then let them go. Sometimes we think transformation is something grand, a turning point that happens overnight. But what I've discovered is that it's made of silent decisions that no one sees. Opening the window in the morning to let in the light, calling someone when loneliness hits, sitting on a park bench and just being there without rushing to leave. True change isn't dramatic, it's patient. It seeps into your daily routine until one day, you realize you're smiling for no reason, laughing at a simple joke, and finding pleasure in the little things again. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this path isn't just mine. How many people carry invisible pain and never have the courage to tell anyone? How many stories get stuck in their throats for fear of being judged? What if what you're going through now is precisely the key to helping someone in the future? This is the most powerful part of the journey. When pain stops being just suffering and becomes a bridge to reach others. When you understand that what you've experienced can be the revelation someone needs to not give up. The impact of this kind of reflection is transformative. You begin to live with more purpose, to care about things that previously went unnoticed. Even everyday conversations take on new meaning. How are you? Stops being a formality and becomes a question you genuinely want to hear the answer to. This changes everything. It changes the way we look at our children, our parents, and friends who have sometimes drifted apart. We begin to value the simple fact of being together, of sharing the same space, and of being able to say, I see you. And that's why I believe these stories need to be told. Because somewhere, someone may be feeling alone right now, and maybe this is the word that will turn on a light. Maybe this is the conversation that will stop someone from giving in to despair. Maybe this is the reminder that there is still life after pain. And you listening to this are part of this story too, because it is in the space between the speaker and the listener that healing spreads. I want to invite you to reflect on what you just heard. Was there a moment in your life when everything seemed dark and suddenly an encounter, a word, a simple gesture changed everything? This is the kind of revelation that transforms not only those who experience it, but also those who hear it. Write in the comments, I found my light. I want to know if you've also had this experience of being reminded that it's still worth carrying on, even after the storms. If you've made it this far, it's because this story spoke to you in some way. So take this moment to leave a like. Not only to support the channel, but also because it's a way to show that this conversation resonated. And if you want to continue walking with me through these reflections that help you see life differently, subscribe to the channel right now. That way, each new video will reach you, and we'll continue this journey together. Write in the comments, I'm with you until the end, just so I know you've stuck with me this far and that this message has reached you. And since you've made it this far, you don't have to stop here. There's a video right here that complements all of this and will take this reflection even deeper. Click and stay with me there. I think you'll like where this conversation takes you.